About 20 years ago, I was going to the gym, the YMCA. It was the tallest building in Watford at that time. It has, I think there's two buildings that now have surpassed it. But I used to go training in the gym down there. And I remember when I joined that gym, I went in, and you get to know people. But I'm the kind of person that when I go to train, I want to work out. I don't want to particularly want to socialize. I just want to go in the gym and train. Maybe I can be a bit unfriendly in that sense, but I'd go to the gym and train. So I was going to this YMCA gym, and you notice people as you go from day to day, when you go and you see people who you may chat to or say hello. And I remember after a period of time, the guys would congregate, some guys, and they'd talk about this particular girl in the gym. And so I looked at this girl, and they were all saying that she looked like a model. She looked like a catwalk model. Very pretty, very slim. Anyway, so I'll just go in there and train and do my business, as you do. And then one day I was in the gym training, and I see her looking at me, so I looked at her back and just carried on training. And then later on that week, I came into the gym, and I see her looking, and so I passed her. So I said to her, good morning. And as I was walking past her, she goes, "Oh, so you speak then, do you?" So I said to her, yeah, I can speak. And so to cut a long story short, she started to talk. She introduced herself. And eventually, she asked me to train her. And eventually, we became training partners. She asked if she could be my training partner. So I laughed. 20 years ago, I was about 30 kg heavier. And so I was pretty big at that time, and I guess pretty strong. And when she asked me to be my training partner, I said to her, "What?" I said, "Are you serious?" She goes, "Yeah, I want to be a trainer." So I said, "All right." So we, started to train. The interesting thing, even though she looked like a catwalk model, she was really strong. And nobody in the gym could work out why was this girl who she's about my height, and she was about 52 kg, so very slim. And she was super strong. Anyway, so, we trained. I remember one session, I was doing chess. And so what I would do back then, I would start with the 40 kg, for those of you who know, 40 kg, 50 kg, and the heaviest dumbbell in the gym was 60 kg. So a 60 kg dumbbell is about that big. And you press. So I was training, and then she offered to pick up the dumbbell. So I laughed. I said, "You pick up the dumbbell?" And she goes, "Yeah." And so I looked at her and said, "Okay." Remember, she weighed 52 kg. So she picked up the 40 kg and gave it to me. And I was like, see, how can that be? And so I did my set. She did her set. And when it came to the 50 kg, which is almost the equivalent of her body weight, and she lifted it and gave it to me, and I was like, how in the world does she do this? When it came to the 60 kg, and I was saying, look, there are most guys in the gym, in that particular gym, couldn't even lift the 60 kg, so what I'd often do is pick it up myself, bounce it on my knees, flick it up and press. And she offered it, and I said, "Come on, it's more than your body weight." And she bent down and picked up the 60 kg dumbbell and gave it. So I was saying, anyway, she, often when she went out, agencies would give her cards to become a model, but she didn't want to become a model. And so one day I said to her, "How is it you're so strong?" And she said this to me. She said to me, "You don't know a person or a thing unless you know their history." So I said, "Okay." So another time we were training together, she said to me, so I said to her, "How is it you're so strong?" And she said to me, "Richard, in my country, I used to be a Sherpa." Now, let me explain what a Sherpa is. She said to me that In her country, there were mountains. Now, Ben Nevis, which is the tallest mountain in the UK, is about 4,500 feet. The tallest mountain in Jamaica, which is Blue Mountain, I think is about 7,500 feet. The country in her country was 9,000 feet, and she said to me that when the Westerners came to her country, she was the only woman who was there who'd be a shepherd. And what a shepherd would do, because the Westerners couldn't walk up with their own luggage, they would give they would negotiate with these individuals who were there, and they would take the Westerners' this rat sack, put it on, and then walk up the mountain with them. Now, think about it. A mountain of 9,000 feet, Ben Nevis would take you about 4 or 5 hours just to get up and not even to come down. So she used to say that she used to negotiate the pay, put the rat sack on her back, and walk up. And people would look at her, and I was like, "Are you sure?" One day she came to the gym, and she took out her phone and says, "Richard, when I saw her, she was at that time 45 kg, skinny. She looked anorexic, and she showed me pictures of her walking up the mountain, and many of the actual rucksacks she would take were so big, they were more than her body weight, and she would walk up 8-9 hours. And even though she was really slim, her hands were really muscular. And I said to her, "How is it your hands are so muscular?" He said, "Richard, when you're walking up a mountain, sometimes you have to grab and walk up the slope. And that's why I can grab more than my body weight." I was amazed. And when she looked at me and smiled and said, "You don't know a person or a thing unless you know their history." Let's pray. Father in heaven, we invite your presence here today. And we just simply ask that your will be done here, and that we'd understand where we are in history and where we are going. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So today, I just want to share with you some history, so you can understand the present and where we are right now. So, the Plain of Dura. Thank you, Kevin. Babylon. About 600 BC, the Neo-Babylon Empire. It was a most glorious kingdom, very privileged, founded after the Assyrian Empire. It became the dominant force in the Middle East. Nebuchadnezzar II was a great king, and he extended the kingdom greatly. He fought many battles and won many battles, including Jerusalem, and he famously destroyed the Solomon's temple. Nebuchadnezzar transformed Babylon. He expanded the canals, built temples, and as you know the history of the world, it was one of the most beautiful cities ever. He built that blue gate towards Babylon, and it's famously had the hanging baskets of Babylon. Babylon itself was a beautiful city, and Nebuchadnezzar was a very powerful king. Babylon itself was fascinated with the number 6 and 60. And so I'm not sure if you know, maybe you knew, they got it from the Sumerians, but Babylon as a culture is very influential in our Western culture. And so believe it or not, how we measure time is how the Babylonians used to measure time. So Babylon used the term 60. So that's why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 for a full circle, and 60 degrees each quarter. All that was done by the Babylonians. And they liked the number 6 Very much so. And so Babylon, historically, was a great kingdom. But then we get to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1, as read by Lorraine and greatly illustrated by Reva and the children's story, we have 4 characters in there. Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or that's their names that were given to them. They had other names. Now, these 4 individuals went to Babylon as slaves. They were captives, and when you read Daniel chapter 1, they were made eunuchs, but I won't even expand on that. And they were put into the Babylon University. So they had a name change. If you look at it on the screen, you have basically Daniel, Hannah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they changed their names to Belteshazzar, what else? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they tried to change who they were. There was a change of name. There was a change of dress. There was a change of diet. And they went to university. Now, it's believed that the first real university in this world was in Bologna in 1088 AD in Italy. The interesting thing is this, though, that universities were believed to have been made by the Jesuits. But and what's the age when children go to university or teenagers go to university? What age are they usually? 17, 18. What was the ages of Daniel and his 3 friends? Similar age, 17, 18. When people go to university, how many years do they go for? About 3 or 4 years. How long was Daniel and his 3 friends in university for? 3 years. When they graduate, in some graduation, you have an oral examination. So most people actually believe that the whole idea of university came from the Babylonians, interestingly enough. And it was set up, and when you look at the Jesuit history in Bologna, they set up universities to train young people, to culture them, so that they can serve the overlords, those who were in power. That's the same thing you get in Daniel chapter 1. You go to university, you get educated so you can serve the overlords. And that is what happened to them. In Daniel chapter 2, you have something amazing, which was simply this. That in Daniel chapter 2, God gave a man who didn't know him, the most powerful ruler in the world, a dream. And this dream is so important. This dream is so important that England's greatest scientist, Sir Isaac Newton, became a believer because of this. He believed that God was in charge of history, and not many people know that Sir Isaac Newton wrote more on religion and prophecy than he did on science. In fact, it was Sir Isaac Newton, strangely enough, who worked out that one of the people who stated that that the USA was the second beast of Revelation chapter 13. Think about it, England's greatest scientist. And so, while I won't go into detail this morning about Daniel chapter 2, it is one of the most important things to understand prophecy. And I'm gonna say this. We are having a campaign, seminar, November the 9th, where we will go into details about this. But Daniel chapter 2 goes through the whole history of this world. And it is a master seminar. It goes through the whole history of this world. And in fact, it is important to understand all prophecies. If you understand Daniel chapter 2, you will understand all other prophecies in the Bible, because all they do is just go into more detail bit by bit. But King Nebuchadnezzar decided that even though he acknowledged in Daniel chapter 2 that God, the God of Daniel, is the God of gods and there's no other like him, he got cold feet. He went back to his culture, and so he decided that he would create his own image, his own God. And there we have the God of Baal, because the image in what God gave him was that the king of Babylon would just be the head of gold, and then different nations would come along until God's kingdom was eventually set up. Again, we'll look at this more detail in the seminar. But King Nebuchadnezzar, he said, no, Babylon will last forever. And so he created the statue of gold. As said in the children's story, it got to a point where Nebuchadnezzar called all the important officials around the kingdom of Babylon and said that they must all come together and worship the idol. And the question I want to ask you is, why did Nebuchadnezzar do this? Why did he ask everybody to come and worship the image? I want to share with you a few things. Number one, he wanted to assert his power and control over the nation. Interestingly enough, William H. Share, an Adventist theologian, digging into some history, he found out that there was a rebellion in the kingdom of Babylon. And so King Nebuchadnezzar decided that years later he would build a statue to call for people's loyalty. It's almost like swearing allegiance to the flag or bowing your knee to the queen, but he wanted people to realize that he was the king who was in control. So that's one of the reasons why he called a statue. Number two, he wanted to enforce a dominant narrative. What do I mean by that? While he acknowledged in Daniel chapter 2 that Daniel's God is the only God, he wanted to go back to Baal being the main god of Babylon. And so, most societies have a dominant narrative. They want to hold the people to a certain culture, a certain understanding. And so King Nebuchadnezzar did the same thing. He wanted to have a dominant narrative that Baal was the god who controlled things, and that people should understand that. And that leads me to the third and final point, which is this. He wanted to enforce universal worship. Any regime, any nation tends to have a religion. If you check through history, and even England in its past was called a Christian country. And any nation or history, when you go through the past, tend to want to have a universal religion for that nation and then to enforce the land. And Nebuchadnezzar was no different. But as Daniel chapter 3 says, how is it that only 3 people didn't want to bow? Thousands of officials there, and only 3 people didn't want to bow. So I did some digging. How many Israelites went from Israel to Babylon? You say thousands? Okay. Well, funny enough, Jeremiah, as you can see on the screen, actually gives an accurate account. It says 4,600 men in 3 deportations were taken out of Babylon. When you then match that to the other record, we can make the suggestion that between 14 to 18,000 people came out of Israel to Babylon, and these were the so-called elite people, the princes, the nobles. More than that, very conservative accounts would suggest that there was maybe between 80 to 100 Israelites of that age who went to the Babylonian University. That being said, why is it that only 3 individuals out of 100 would not bow their knee to the idol? If you consider that, you must consider this. The Statue of Liberty was given by the French to America, and it took 9 years to build. How long would a statue of similar size would take in a Babylonian time? Most people estimate it would have taken about 20 years to build the statue on the Plain of Dura. Now, that would make it to be that there was enough time for people to be aware that the statue or image was going to be built. With that being said, that would mean that only a few people, only 3 people, would not bow their knee. So what can we say about that on the Plain of Dura? Number 1, an image was being built to force people to submit to the ruler's wishes. That's why King Nebuchadnezzar made that. Number 2, everyone in the kingdom knew that the image was going to be built. It took, they reckon, 4,388 tons of gold to build an image of 90 feet. Everybody knew that the image was going to be built. Number 3, Babylon. Everyone had time to prepare. Everybody had time to prepare and knew that the image was coming. And number 4, everybody has a choice. So my simple question to you today is simply this. Is there an image being built today? Is there an image being built today? Okay. 1 Corinthians 10, if I can read, 10 verse 11 says this. Read that with me, please. Example and warnings to us. They were written for our instructions to admonish and equip us on upon whom the ends of the world have come. So, the Plain of Judah, or Dura, in modern times, is there an image which is going to be built now? Well, let me just take you back to the slide. This slide here. Why did Nebuchadnezzar force the image? What was the reasons? Number 1, it was assertion of power and control. Number 2, it was to enforce a dominant narrative. And number 3, universal worship. So let's just get into that now. Is there an image being set up today? What do we say? Well, going to the book of Revelation, it says this. Can you read that for me? You see the mark on the right hand or on their foreheads, so that no one might buy or sell except one who faces dark business. So, I'm going to suggest the Bible makes it clear that there will be enforcement at the end of time. Okay, point number 2 is this. Will there be a dominant narrative? Will there be a dominant narrative? Well, look at this, Revelation 18, verses 2 and 3, and it says this. Read with me. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place for demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath. Okay, the wine is the doctrine or the dominant narrative. So, and the third one, universal worship. Read with me again, the last one. It says this, Revelation 13, 11 and 12. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and it had what? 2 horns, like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast and his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to work the first beast, whose deadly wound has been healed. Some versions say forces worship. So the Bible makes it clear that that in our time, there will be another image set up. So, today's steps in the Plain of Dura: assertion of power, dominant narrative. What's the last one? Universal worship. So I'm just going to look at this in three ways. The three steps to the Plain of Dura today. Number one, we're going to look at socialization. Number two, deception. And number three, indifference. And that's all we'll look at for the rest of the day. As we come to the Plain of Dura, something is being set up. Something which is being set up in our very eyes, and which oftentimes we do not notice or realize. So let's look at socialization. What is socialization? Can somebody read that for me? Socialization?
Socialization generally refers to a process of social influence through which a person acquires the culture or subculture of their group. And in the course of acquiring these cultural elements, the individual's self and personalities are shaped.
Thank you. Socialization is a process that happens to anybody who goes to any other culture. When you go through time, people absorb the culture. When people came from the Caribbean or Africa, they absorb the culture. And if you do not have something authoritative in your life, those norms of that culture will become your standard. So for instance, when we look at the history of the world, these are the different periods of time that people talk about. The Iron Age, the Middle Ages, the Industrial Age. So let me just pick up on one of them, the Industrial Age, just to show you how something can become a norm. Now, during the time in the 19th century, people used to believe that the world was going to become a better place. And they had this thing called eugenics. Now, eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of the human race, interestingly. So what people used to do, people used to meet, it was on fronts of newspapers, and people used to believe that they could better the human race. And so if you were deemed as maybe not helping the genetic quality of the human race, you were sterilized. It was common practice. If you had mental illness in your family, you were sterilized. If you were of a subgroup but the dominant culture didn't like, you could be sterilized. And in fact, history records this, that Hitler wrote to the American Eugenic Society and he thanked them for creating ideas in his head that would help to purport his idea of a superhuman race. So when I was reading up on the history of this, what made me laugh was that an ex-Adventist, Harvey Kellogg, and his wife at the time went to these meetings because it was a dominant culture of the day that we could make the human gene, the human nature, the human quality of humanity better. Imagine that. People will be sterilized. And I say it to say this. What is the common currency of our culture today? Historians call our time period right now as postmodernism, but that's not a typo. So what is postmodernism? Postmodernism, very simply, I give a definition on the room, is that there is relativism. In other words, there is no real truth. Your truth and my truth are different, but that's fine because it goes against what is true. There's no real standard. So what tends to happen is this, that in this world where there is no real standard, anything goes. Our postmodernism world, there's no absolute truth. So therefore, Feminism has come about because there's no absolute truth. LGBTQ plus whatever, because I'm not a he or a she. I can be anything because there's no absolute truth. Pornography has gone prolific because it's neither right nor wrong. The normalization of witchcraft, because there's no real error, there's no real wrong. And so that has become current currency today because people do not believe that there's an absolute truth. I've even heard it in church where people say, well, you have your truth, I have my truth. That's fine. No, there's one truth found in Jesus. And today in our postmodern society, people don't believe that. Interesting. But it's true. There's a thing called gradualism. Now, every day I have cold showers. Now, it took me 3 months to get there. And so what I tend to do, I go full hot and then straight cold. When I first did that, I shouted. I couldn't believe how cold water was, even though I may wash my hands in cold water. So what I had to do is bit by bit, filter until I could do it. The first time I did it, I said, it was a strain. But the funny thing is now, every day, in fact, I'm going to say this, I don't feel like I've had a shower until I've had some cold water on me, pure cold. I can almost say I now enjoy it. Gradualism is a philosophy that you just push something on bit by bit. And the truth today, if you look at our society, is bit by bit that people are breaking down what we know as truth. And I'm saying that we have to be very much aware that we do not get caught up in the breakdown of what we know as truth. And so, I'm going to say this, that we need, as it says in the text there, Romans 12 verse 2, and do not be conformed to what? This world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind and do that which is acceptable and the perfect will of God. So, as we come to the Plain of Dura again, more is being built. And I thank you, Ella, for doing these AIs for me. Greater and greater are we being built. And so we come to this. Deception. Deception is a huge thing. Now, in Matthew 24, Jesus, when the disciples are asking Jesus, how will their age end and how will the world end? Jesus first says to them, please make sure that no one deceives you. And it says, prophets will come in my name and deceive many. Now, answer me, is many a few? It's the opposite of few. So would you say the many is the majority? You would say that. So Jesus is referring to the end of the world, and he was saying that the majority will be deceived. Yeah? Then, in verse 24, what did it say there? He says that the very elect will be deceived if it were possible. It reminds me of the text in Matthew 7, verse 13 and 14, where it says, wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many find it, but very few, but what? Few, narrow is the gate, and only a few find it. So, I think it's basically saying again that the majority of the world will be deceived. Am I wrong? To conclude that, then there's a really scary text in 2 Thessalonians. And it says this, 2 Thessalonians. It says, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not love the truth that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusions so that they should believe a lie. Think about that. That's a scary text. So because people do not love the truth, it is saying that they will be deceived. It is saying that the majority of the world will be deceived. Now, dominant narrative. If that is the case, a dominant narrative is a widely accepted story, belief, or explanation that reinforces the power and the interest of a dominant group, often achieved through constant repetition and a silence of other perspectives. These narratives are not objective truths, rather they are created stories of reality and promote existing power structures and lead into harmful stereotypes. Now, if you understand and appreciate that, what you know is this. If you go against the dominative narrative today, you often be seen as a conspiracist, or you are doing harmful or dangerous speech. Now, I'm not saying there's not conspiracies. I had to clear one this week in China. They were saying that China is in a certain way. So I contacted the person in China and I said, is that the case? And the person said, no. They've been living in China for the past 9-10 years. But if you go against a dominant narrative today, you are either seen as doing hurtful, harmful speech, or it's a conspiracy. Now, will this affect you? Okay, so I was in church about a month ago, and I was in Sabbath school, and I wanted to find a text. And so I pulled out my phone, and I went to Gateway, Bible Gateway, and it was gone. And I was like, oh, it must be something wrong with my phone or the internet. And so I was at then the prayer meeting, and then Pastor was mentioning that his favorite online Bible, which was, his one is Bible.com, he said that was off, and so we started to say, well, so I said, what? So I went home, went online, and I got this. Bible Gateway is currently unavailable. And I said, what? So when I did a bit more research, it's because they have deemed Bible Gateway and Bible.com as, what? What did it say there? As hate speech. Hate speech. So I remember growing up an Adventist, and we used to say that in the last days, just like in the Dark Ages, they would take away our Bibles, and that nobody would have use to the Bible. It's nice to say, how are they going to do that in this day and age? Now, I dismissed it, only to my horror, that I can stand here in 2025 and say to you, they are now deeming the Bible as hate speech. Think about that. Now, through protests, which only one person who attends the church would go on, you can now get back onto Bible Gateway. But they deem it as hate speech. Now, I'm going to say this. The dominant narrative now is that there's relativism. There is no absolute truth. So when I dug a bit further and read some papers, you know what they're now saying? They're saying that God made male and female hate speech. Think about that. The Bible speaks against same-sex relationships. That's now termed hate speech. Now, my favorite version of the Bible is the New Revised Standard Version. It's a version I like most of all. But I was just saying to Kevin in the room, the very new one has taken out anything to do with homosexuality, because it's now deemed as hate speech. It goes even further. The Bible teaches that at the end, that some people go to heaven, some people go to hell. That is hate speech. That is now termed as hate speech. In fact, Revelation chapter 13, the first beast, Rome, Catholic, and the second beast, the United States, is now termed as hate speech. And so, when you think about it, in our time, an image is being built where if somebody wanted to be horrible, and I'm sure that the time will come, that what I'm saying today, a person could contact the authorities and I would be arrested. Is it happening in England? Yes, it is. In Russia, over the past year, people have been arrested for speaking against the government, 3,385. How many in that same time period have been arrested and charged in England? 12,000. So the image is being built, and yet we are not aware that as the process of time continues, when you speak against the dominant narrative, it's deemed as hate speech, or some people call it conspiracy. The 3 Babylonians who went to university didn't want to conform to the dominant narrative. The process of you accepting their thinking and their ideas, they can authenticate you as one of their own. So you will not speak out against anything, you just go along with the dominant narrative. Eventually, this authentication process will achieve in that you will receive a mark. Remember your digital ID, where you cannot either buy or sell because you have accepted their image. They want to create your image in their image so that you can become like their God. I hope that's not too complex. But they're doing it. They are trying to create an image. And so as we go along the path of time, what you will find is that bit by bit, the image is being built. And before you know it, they will call for worship. So let's look at one more point, which is indifference. How can indifference be a part? Because you can be sitting in church and still be barren to the idol in the Plain of Dura. Dura, thank you. Don't mistake presence in the house of God to loyalty to God. The 3 Hebrew boys were in Babylon, but they refused to bow on the Plain of Dura. Today, around the world, many are in the house of God with hands lifted high, but oftentimes their hearts are bowed to idols. Worship is not about location, it's about allegiance. Don't be indifferent to your present state. As the Bible says, work out your own salvation with what? Fear and trembling. If 100 bright students went to Babylon, how is it that 97 of them bowed their knee? Socialization, and dare I say, deception, has caused an indifference in this church. Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 1 shows that they changed their names. In the same chapter, they changed their diet, changed their dress, and even changed their music in chapter 3. They refused to accept the narrative, and so they became aliens to that situation and were preparing to be burned. Now, I could speak about diet, and I could speak about dress, but let me just touch upon music, a very touchy subject. What is currently happening in our church and some of our more ethnic institutions is, for me, madness. The music within the Adventist church is changing. The sounds which were now set apart for sacred are now being blended with rhythms and styles that stir more emotion than anything else, and are being played in our churches, not for the better. Now, I can thank God that here at Watford Town Church, that when people can say, well, your church is very conservative, and I said, yes, it is. Because there needs to be a reverence and a spirit of worship of whom we are worshipping. Yet, you don't have to travel too far not even beyond our own camp meetings and institutions, to witness a different sound amongst our people. A sound that raises questions. Are we drawing hearts to Christ, or are we just stirring up the crowd? Are we worshipping in spirit and in truth, or are we just blending noise to the dominant narrative? Music is not neutral. Did you hear me? Music is not neutral. It guards the mind and it prepares us either for stillness with God or the distractions of Babylon. And so, if I can just go back, I want to show you something. So I said this when I was writing in July, that the wrong music in church not only weakens the moral and spiritual fabric of the church, it loosens one's grip on the truth and aids deception. You may not agree with me. I go on to say this. Now the Spirit especially says that in the latter times some will apart from the truth, giving heed to deceiving spirits and the doctrines of demons. Music can do that. And I won't spend more time on it, but this great preacher here, you know him, C.D. Brooks. In a famous sermon where he called I Want My Church Back, you can listen to the whole sermon online, quoting Harold Lee, he says this: Neo-Pentecostalism will be the death of black Adventism. Now, if you don't know what's happening in our church in America right now, it's crazy. I was looking at something last night. I just came up and I went, what? Something with, no, I won't even go there. But it is to say that we have to be very much aware of what is happening in our church now. This helps in the building of the image, and we will fall. So, then the third angel followed them and said, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives the mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself will also drink of the wine of the wrath of God. Please understand this. The mark of the beast, first in the forehead, means that one has surrendered one's thinking and allegiance to the dominant narrative. Do you understand that? Even before one has even physically bowed their knee. So when you are taking in the principles of that culture without having the third word of God to make you bolster against it, you start to surrender one's thinking and allegiance. And there, as the Bible says, you start to believe the dominant narrative and you eventually become deceived, believing that you are right still. And so, very soon, the statue will be built. The image will be prepared. And if you do not go against it, there will be the fires of persecution will rise once again. So I want to conclude. 2 weeks ago, I got a phone call from a friend of mine, a gym friend of mine, who said to me that such and such a person has now has died. And I said, what? He was younger than me. I won't mention his name. I think he was about 49, 50. So I was saying to myself, now I used to actually train him. And dare I say, he had a brilliant physique. He was super lean, super cut, and everybody admired his physique. But he wanted to do things which I used to say to him, you're too old to take steroids and to eat so much food. I said to him, he said, no, but I want to compete. I said, all right. So he started to eat a lot more, take steroids. And I see him in the chat. I remember one time he was a diabetic, and he had is it diabetic fit, if I can call it that. He was in the gym, and we had to revive him. So when he died 2 weeks ago, I rang somebody else, and everybody who I rang said, not surprised, not surprised. Why were they not surprised when our friend died for? because they said, Richard, he was doing things that he shouldn't have been doing, and he was too old for it. You see, I realize now as I get older, the most important muscle I have is my heart muscle. You can't play with it. He became indifferent to the advices that people gave him. And so my conclusion is this. If you are an Adventist, you can't remain as you are because the image is being built. And so I would suggest that you can't be indifferent. If you are not an Adventist, I'm going to suggest that you can't be indifferent. Why? Because like it or not, the world is changing and the image is being built. To remain indifferent means that you will be caught up and deceived and find yourself worshipping an image to the beast. My simple request is this: make a change in your life. Be aware of what's happening in the world. Be equipped to know that you must spend time with the Lord, or otherwise you will end up being deceived. Thank you.